Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today I'm gonna be taking a look at the brand new Elijah Craig Toasted Rye Whiskey, a non-age stated rye bottled at 47% ABV or 94 proof. It's coming to us from Heaven Hill, and it is the latest extension in the Elijah Craig portfolio. We've seen a straight rye whiskey being added a few years ago. We've also seen this toasted barrel bourbon, which I do have out here on the table for a comparison at the end of this video. But first and foremost, we have to dive into the task at hand, which is this toasted rye whiskey. And I know for me, this is a very exciting addition to the Elijah Craig line. I've called 2024 for the last several months the year of the rye whiskey because we've seen so many incredible ryes, not the least of which are those 11 to 12 year MGP 95.5s that seemingly every NDP is getting their hands on. And you know, Drums and Drams, we've selected a few of those from River Roots. Fantastic stuff, but we've also seen some great rye whiskeys from legacy distilleries, Knob Creek putting out that 10-year rye, and just a whole slew of rye whiskeys across the board. And so now we have this toasted edition from Elijah Craig. I'm very excited about it. So let's check this out on the nose, on the palate, and see what we get. And before we do, I do want to say thank you to Adam H., one of my Patreon members, who very generously picked this bottle up for me. I believe from the Evan Williams gift shop of all places. That may be the only place it's dropped at this point. Maybe some, media samples out there as well, but this was not a media sample. This was bought and paid for. So totally unbiased review. It's going for about 55 bucks if you find it at SRP. Let's go to the nose now and see what we get. All right, so the nose of this whiskey is a little bit confusing for me. It feels like it's all over the place. So the first thing that I'm hit with is kind of like this artificial marshmallow note. And on a lot of these toasted products, bourbons, ryes, toasted double oaked, whatever, you can get a marshmallow note. It's not an uncommon thing. And most of the time, I think it's a really pleasant note, and it's kind of the hallmark of this style of whiskey. But here it's coming off kind of artificially sweet. It also has a little bit of like a plasticky, almost chemical thing going on. And I don't mean to suggest that there's anything wrong with the whiskey, but it's just the way that marshmallow note is coming off. It's bright, it's sweet, but it's a little bit odd for me, and I don't love it. Now, it's not a one-trick pony. I will say, like, on the nose, this whiskey does have a lot going on. There are clearly layers going on here, but first impression for me is there's some stuff I like, there's some stuff I don't like, and it just kind of feels all over the place. So just beneath that marshmallow note, you do start to pick up on a lot of that rye character of this whiskey. So there is a big punch of oak on the nose here, and it's not a deep, dark, rich kind of oak. It's not coming off like a particularly old whiskey. This is a bright, youthful, almost slightly aggressive, young oak profile. A lot of people say this, it's like when you walk into the lumber section of a Home Depot or a Lowe's, that smell that you get, that raw wood character, that's what's coming through for me on this rye. But there are other notes mingling in with that oaky sensation. There's a kind of a nice citrus thing going on here, some herbal qualities, and actually one thing that's surprising me on this rye, given the fact that it's from Heaven Hill, it's an Elijah Craig rye, and I know the base whiskey that this is made from, the straight rye that they produce, it's surprising to me that I'm getting a dill note on here, because on that straight rye that they make, I never really get dill. I get chocolate, I get kind of like a spearmint thing, but here there is the addition of dill. It's almost feeling like the rye is a little bit more active in this whiskey for whatever reason. In some ways that's good because it can stand up to the toasted finish, but in other ways I think this is feeling a little bit, again, disjunct, a little disoriented on the nose for me. So there are these citrus notes, there's this artificial marshmallow, intense oakiness, and some of this might sound appealing to you, and I wouldn't fault you if you like this whiskey on the nose, but to me so far, again, it's just not really doing it for me. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this up now by talking about the three sort of foundational, structural elements of this whiskey, basically the base notes that everything else is sitting on top of and being supported by. So again, I'm gonna give you three of these. The first is what I call a standard Kentucky bourbon caramel or boozy caramel sauce kind of note. I know this is a toasted rye, but a lot of these legacy Kentucky distilleries can give you this beautiful, rich caramel profile. That is definitely here in this Elijah Craig toasted rye, so I have to give Heaven Hill props for that. I love that note. But just beneath that is something that, well, let's really say two things that I think are gonna turn a lot of bourbon drinkers off, and I would be very curious to hear your opinions on this. If you guys have had the chance to try this, let me know in the comment section below. The first of the two is sort of a honey malty character to this, almost like a Highland Scotch heather honey malt backbone to the whiskey, so I do find that interesting. But I think that's the least offensive of the two, because the other is almost this smokiness. And it comes off in this floral, but also barbecue peat kind of way. And again, I think that a lot of people are gonna latch onto these notes at the base of this whiskey, and I think they might have a hard time with it. So all in all, I'm gonna stand by what I said upon first nosing. I think this is a confusing and confused whiskey, and it actually feels like there might be a little too much water added to it as well. So in some ways, you know, when you add too much water to a whiskey, you can start to pull it apart too much, and the profile can start to disintegrate and just really fall apart. That's kind of what this feels like. And so again, we're purely on the nose. We're gonna go to the palate here in a second, but I would really wonder what this smells like at 100 proof, at 107 proof. But let's go to the palate now, cheers. All right, so this whiskey opens up with a humongous punch of sweetness on the front of the palate, but there are also some interesting youthful and grain-forward notes in there as well. I would say the primary note that I'm picking up on is candy corn, and I do like that note. It's a cool note to find in a whiskey. There's also some creamed corn in here and like a buttered popcorn note as well. So I said the word corn there quite a bit, and that's because even with this enveloping, rich, almost decadent marshmallowy sweetness, candy corn sweetness, even with all of that, it's still punctuated by these grainy, youthful corn notes. It's not the worst thing in the world because there is some balance there, but I do think it feels just a little bit young on the front of the palate. But just behind that, like as I expect this whiskey to develop on the mid palate and show some more of its rye characteristics, it completely falls off. I do get a little bit of a peppery quality on my tongue. I get some herbal spice, definitely a little bit of that dill that I found on the nose, which I think is uncharacteristic for one of these Elijah Craig products. I do get some element of that in the mid palate, but it completely falls off. And the finish is also extremely short, and it trails off into some of those notes that I talked about on the nose, like those base notes of the whiskey. It has a nice caramel note on the finish. I do appreciate that. It actually has a new note for me on this whiskey that I wasn't getting on the nose, which is like a buttercream frosting characteristic. But there's also kind of like this bitter floral and barbecue smokiness going on there. So I just think for me, with a finish that's this short, with a whiskey that completely lacks development and feels like it's just watered down too much to a proof that it can't handle, and one that on the nose is so all over the place and disjunct, it's an easy pass for me. At 55 bucks at SRP, that's a great price for this whiskey. This is a no for me, absolutely a no. So I am gonna do a second sip, but it's gonna be in comparison to this toasted bourbon. So let's get this on the nose now, on the palate, and see what we get. And again, reminder, this is also 94 proof. So the exact same proof point. Let's see if it has the same problem of feeling just a little bit too watery. And on the nose, I'm gonna say that it absolutely does not have that problem. This is oaky and rich. It's deeper and more decadent brown sugars. It's the profile that I really, really love from Heaven Hill, from Elijah Craig. And I think in years past, I've been lukewarm on their toasted bourbon. This is a recent bottling, and on the nose, this smells fantastic. So already, I'm gonna say that this is really, really doing well as compared to this toasted rye. Let's go to the palate now, cheers. Yeah, this is a clear winner for me. It's not even close. The palate development on this bourbon is significantly longer than the rye. It's enveloping, it's full on the palate. None of those kind of watery issues that the rye has. That marshmallow note is present in the toasted bourbon, but it does not come off artificial whatsoever. It actually accentuates the oak in the whiskey, the toasted finish does. And I think this is a great buy at 50 to 60 bucks. This toasted bourbon is one that I think even non-toasted fans would probably like. And I wouldn't have said that 2 or 3 years ago when this product for me felt a little more divisive, maybe felt a little more artificial actually, kind of like this toasted rye. I think maybe the first iterations of this toasted bourbon had maybe some of the same problems, but it feels like now they've dialed in the recipe on this toasted bourbon. So that's a highly recommended product, at least for me. And the toasted rye is one that I think you should just leave on the shelf, and definitely do not pay secondary upcharges if they exist for this toasted rye. There's no reason to have FOMO about this product. So with that said, I'm very curious to hear you guys' experience, especially with this toasted rye, when this does hit the market more widely. Let me know what you think. Hit that like button, comment, subscribe. Check out the Patreon for some extra content and barrel picks. That's gonna do it, guys. Cheers, and I'll see you soon here on Drums and Drams.